Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here in Charlotte for the Tech Home Builders Summit. My name is Brandon Savage. I'll give a little bit more detailed introduction to myself here in just a moment. We're starting a little bit late, apologize, but we're ready to start. So I'm going to start off by inviting our panelists to come on up and have a seat. And then I'm going to turn the time over first to our sponsor for today's session, Marshall Friday from ADT, and he's got a few things that he's going to share with you before we begin our discussion today.
Smart home technology for your community. The most respected name in security allows you to easily manage hundreds of units in one location, all connected and accessible from your phone. An ADT Smart Home Community offers a premium experience for residents and prospects. Self-guided property tours of vacant units lets prospective residents schedule and tour available units on their time. A one-time access code allows prospects to easily and safely view your property. In an ADT Smart Community, residents are truly amazed what they can do with just a touch or the sound of their voice. Smart thermostats allow them to turn the AC or heat on before they arrive. Set scenes for home automation using smart lights. Easily buzz or unlock doors from anywhere with smart locks. Gain access to the gym and other amenities with your phone. And give service people access to the apartment with temporary unique user codes. And ADT offers an alarm option, allowing your community to be smart and safe. The 24/7 ADT network. ADT Multifamily integrates with a wide variety of property management software systems. Get the benefits of a 24/7 lead management tool. Move people in or out. Control exterior and common area cameras from anywhere. Get notifications immediately if there are leaks. 200 branch locations, 4,000 techs with 9+ years of experience, members of NAA and NMHC, and the backing of 24/7 protection. ADT Multifamily, an end-to-end smart community solution.
So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Charlotte. For those of you who have seen ADT Multifamily in action before, we are more than just a home security company, more than just a commercial security company. We are a multifamily company as well. We do smart technology like many other players in the space these days. We are here at Tech Home this week to talk to you guys about smart technology in unit. A lot of you, I see some familiar faces out there, have been in a boardroom with us in the past. Attended a trade show where we've spoken together, but excited to continue that conversation with all of you and just really keep the name going that ADT is more than just your dad's security company. So with that, Brandon, I'm excited about this conversation today.
Well, terrific. We'll start off by doing some introductions with everyone around the table. We already got a head start with Marshall. Before we do the introductions, just want to give you some frame of reference for our event today, and I'll be the moderator through the 5 different panel discussions that we'll have spanning today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. But we have 82 sponsor companies here at Tech Home. We have 108 builder and multifamily guests. In this particular track, we have 27 multifam hosted guests. In the other tracks, we have 53 high-volume guests and 28 luxury guests. The goals for our track, my goal is to try to make sure that each of you feels that this next 48 hours is delivering value and you're having a good experience as you're contemplating how you can further incorporate technology into your strategy and into your future plans for your company and for your properties. So one of the things where you will get value over the next 48 hours is what was just taking place before we told you to sit down, and that's networking, talking to each other, getting to know other people in the industry, and being able to talk with them about things they're doing, share things that you're doing. So the networking is important, and please take advantage of that. Over the next 2 days, when we come in here for our sessions, it'll be spanning mealtime. So you're going to come in tomorrow morning at breakfast, and we'll have you take 15, 20 minutes before we start talking for you to eat and to visit and meet with each other. And so please take advantage of that. As we look at our 5 panel discussions over this next 48 hours, here's kind of the roadmap of what you're going to experience. So today, we're going to talk about the value of technology and how to quantify that and how investors are looking at technology in multifamily buildings. Second, tomorrow morning, we're going to focus specifically on in-unit technology and look at what's happening right now and what's on the horizon when it comes to in-unit tech. Lunch tomorrow will focus to shared space tech and amenities, and particularly pulling over what's happening in the hospitality space that we believe is starting to bleed over into multifamily and what could bleed over in the future. Wednesday morning, we'll look specifically at how technology can enable OpEx savings within your properties. And then at lunchtime, we'll look at revenue opportunities that tech can bring. So that's kind of the goal. And across these 5 sessions, you're going to hear some of the things mentioned over and over again. And keep an eye out for those patterns, particularly if there are things that you don't already have within your properties. If you're hearing it mentioned by various panels, that probably indicates it's something that you want to put onto your roadmap, or at least consider why you haven't put it on your roadmap yet, and maybe potentially reevaluate. So here's our speakers for today, and this weekend, as I'm sure has maybe impacted some of you, there's been a lot of uncertainty in the banking industry, and that has definitely had its impact on a handful of panelists that I've been working for. We had some changes at the last minute here that I don't know were tied necessarily to this weekend's events, but we're glad with those that we have with us. So let me do introduction to myself first. My name is Brandon Savage. I am an instructor in the College of Business at Kansas State University in Manhattan, Kansas. I also do a bit of work in a lot of different areas. This is one of them, is being able to moderate at events like that, looking at the intersection of technology and housing. In my local community, I serve as the chair of our local affiliate of Habitat for Humanity. And we've had some pretty interesting developments in some of the builds that we're doing that are kind of cutting edge with technology, single residential space. But this is something that definitely I have a passion for and an interest in. I also work with a couple other companies. I did my master's in business at Wharton. That's enough about me. Let's look at some of our presenters today. So let me have Joel introduce himself, and then we'll work our way around the rest of the table.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. I'm very excited to be here with everyone today. I represent a company called Vutility. We are an IoT energy monitoring company. We've been around for about 5 years, really focused from the commercialization side for about the last 2, which is around when I joined the company. Previously spent several years working at Constellation and some other energy companies, and my focus in those roles was around IoT and energy management technologies. So product that I'm going to be talking about a little bit as we go through is this one. It's called the Hot Drop. This is a wireless sub-meter that can install literally with a QR code scan and a snap inside the panel. So that's one of my products. Seeing a lot of traction in the multifamily space with that specifically, but we don't focus exclusively on multifamily. We're really an enablement technology across commercial, industrial, and residential. So excited about the conversation, and thank you for the invite to be here.
Next, Marshall, anything else you want to add to your background?
Yeah, I've been at ADT for 17 years. I did work for the part of the company that was your dad's alarm company, knocking on doors when I was in college. But have since found the light and come to the multifamily side of the house where this has probably been the most fun that I've had in my career there. So excited to continue the conversation with all of you today throughout the boardrooms and in the trade show floor as well.
We share a little bit of history there. I spent about 15 years in the electronic security alarm industry. Part of it was at some other door knocking companies, and so we've been able to share stories about the early days. And
nothing prepares you more for speaking in front of people than knocking on a stranger's door in the dinner and being the pleasant interruption they were hoping for.
This is true. Next up, Taylor.
I love that. Yeah, so I'm Taylor Whitaker. I'm the founder and CEO of Innovative NOI Inc. We are a data company that helps owner-operators understand how to quantify technology. So we actually have an in-house proprietary AI and are integrated with some of the biggest and cleanest data sources that the industry offers today. And that really allows us to, again, show owners that are interested in really understanding something like smart home, but more from a dollars and cents standpoint. So that's really what we do. And that was prior at Alliance Residential Company and BH Management, where I led innovation and actually was able to learn about how these technologies impact the bottom line. So that's, I think, good context for the conversation today, for sure.
Absolutely.
So we've got a couple of questions that we're going to start off with. Now, as we go through this, if you do have questions, feel free to raise your hand and get my attention. If you do have something, pause for a moment. We'll have Katie, who we affectionately are calling our room CEO here in the back, has a microphone that she'll bring around. We are recording this, and we want to make sure that any comments from the audience get on tape. We'll also have I anticipate that we'll have some time towards the end of the hour that we can also do a Q&A session. So let's start off first. The whole premise of the topic today is on investment decisions when it comes to technology. So we're going to go around the table. I want to start with Joel. What are some of the technologies that you're seeing that are driving value for investors and operators? And you've already given us a little sneak preview, but
I'll make sure to touch on that a little bit more context. So we're focused on the energy monitoring space. That has a wide range of applications depending on what industry you're talking about. In the multifamily space, there are really a few directions, some cases, multiple applications of the same device within a facility. So first and foremost is submetering. So a lot of buildings that are pre-existing have a single master meter. They're not in a position to bill their tenants directly based on usage. We're trying to make that possible at scale, cost effectively. So typical monitoring solution, the majority of the cost actually goes towards the engineering side of it because there's line diagrams and you're going to be affecting the building, running conduit through different buildings into panels, different things like that. We're non-intrusive, which is very unique. So not only in the scoping side of it much simpler, it's also much faster to install. So we see cost of ownership reductions by about 90% in most cases for applications like submetering. So we're certainly enabling that. I'm actually got a lot of activity right now in the new construction space. That's one of my fastest growing channels in my business, but then the retrofit space as well. Similarly, you've got that data, whether it's for tenant spaces, whether it's for the common areas, from a preventative maintenance or predictive maintenance perspective, being able to identify where the facility is inefficient. All of that ultimately leads to ESG reporting and sustainability initiatives that a lot of the larger portfolio owners are trying to achieve. So if a tenant's not being billed, they don't necessarily have the same incentive to participate in energy reduction in the facility. So that's one way to shift that. There's a whole other set of multifamily properties where the utility is billing the tenants directly, and the property owner can't actually get an accurate perspective on what the building envelope looks like. So we, in that case, are coming in and helping with what's called shadow metering. And that shadow metering is giving them visibility to what an entire campus looks like at minimal added cost. So we're seeing that as a real driver for value. And it'd be interesting, I think this will work into a few other parts of the conversation, but it's not just Class A properties that are getting this assistance. It's actually enabling value creation for B and C portfolio properties as well. The backbone for all of this is an IoT network. We use LoRaWAN as the IoT network for our devices. I can go into more detail later if someone's interested why we use LoRaWAN specifically. LoRaWAN is Long Range Wide Area Network is what that stands for. But I think it's going to be more and more common for property managers and property owners to have to make sort of strategic decisions on which IoT networks they're going to introduce in the building. Residential, you see a bunch of Wi-Fi devices. That doesn't necessarily scale in a multifamily setting. So identifying what technology is sort of the IoT backbone to enable all the point devices and solutions that sit on top of that's a key decision to make. And then interoperability, ease of integration into existing systems and software platforms. We're API driven. We're really focused on being an enablement technology. So we don't do anything really from an end-to-end perspective. I collect data that no one else is going to be able to do cost effectively, and then I deliver that into applications that the end customer is looking to achieve.
So with that shadow monitoring, what value does that bring to a property owner to know, hey, even though all of this is being billed out directly to everyone's there, why would they want to know what the entire property and envelope looks like?
So it's increasingly becoming challenging to raise funds for new portfolios without having these benchmarks and sort of year-over-year reporting. There's ways to estimate it. That's getting more and more scrutinized. The SEC drafted some proposed rules last year around ESG reporting requirements. That's going to be more and more stringent. We're doing a lot of work internationally as well. Europe's way ahead of us on sort of the mandate side around this and what the requirements are. But it's having sort of that ripple effect where, to go out and raise additional capital, you're having to demonstrate higher and higher verifiable documentation around what your current properties look like from an energy benchmarking perspective. Similarly, you have challenges in certain areas. Geographically, they have energy usage intensity requirements that may be mandated by the local government. And so being able to comply with that, just be frank, the utilities don't typically help you with this. It's just they'll cite PII and all sorts of stuff, and if they would, it would make everyone's job a lot easier. But organizations are having to find their own way to get that data.
They're so incentivized to help you spend less money with them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can see why they'd put up as many roadblocks as possible for you to be able to see what's really getting used. And so with this type of technology, do you use the same thing whether you're doing a new build or a retrofit?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a one-size
Absolutely,
fits all.
absolutely. So, it's super simple to install. For an apartment, we put this on the mains, feeding into that panel or sub-panel. Literally, we have hospitals and other, larger facilities. We do over 200 of these in a single afternoon. So, that you're thinking about projects that typically would have been sort of months of planning ahead of time and then multiple weeks on site where you're interrupting. It's like, hey, you may have your power cut off today because we're doing this floor and this floor today. We're non-intrusive, power never goes off, and we're in and out in the same day. So,
how long do the batteries last on something like that?
that's the cool part. I didn't even mention this.
Oh.
This is a self-harvesting device. So this powers itself. There's no battery inside it. It inductively charges the same way your
I did
iPhone
not know that. That was a good setup, but
Yeah.
I was just curious.
I try not to brag too much at these shows, so when it gets it's a layup, I'll take you can get the assist on that one. So no, it's
cool.
a self-powered device. That's what makes it so unique in the market. Just such an easy product to install.
All right. Well, this is not intended to be a commercial, but I think he's done a good job of being able to sell why this is important to be able to know what the power envelope is on your property, and hopefully you can see how that can benefit you for future planning, but also to be able to deliver value to your customers, the clients, the residents. So let's move around the table. Next up, I think we had Marshall. So as a vendor, what are some of the ways your clients are seeing value being added through the technology you provide, or just the technology is providing in general?
Yeah, it's interesting in this space when it comes to smart technology, because it's a newer piece that's being added into multifamily properties. I would say the first adoption of this maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago at the most. There's still some confusion among who makes the decision for something like this. Is it somebody in procurement? Is it somebody in finance? Is it somebody in operations? Is it somebody in property management who's going to be using this every single day? So we get bounced around quite a bit when it comes to implementing smart technology, but at the end of the day, the chief technology officer can see something that integrates seamlessly with what they're using. The chief financial officer can see returns on an investment in smart home. The head of operations sees a smoother operation at each one of the properties that they manage. The interesting thing here, assuming any of you had more than $250,000 at SVB and it's gone now, the investment in technology can be nothing. One of the things that ADT prides itself on is flexible investment options. So it gives you the ability to either pay for all this equipment up front or to lease the equipment from ADT. In that case, you get constant upgrades over the life of your agreement. Whenever it comes up for renewal, you can say, hey, what's the latest and greatest that's come out? Maybe there's a brand new sensor that comes out. It doesn't sound like that needs to be upgraded anytime soon, but maybe there's a new sensor that comes out that makes sense to upgrade on the property. But for the investment that people are making in technology, I feel like every supplier in the space says the same thing, right? It's going to drive down your operational costs. It's going to increase resident retention. It's going to increase resident satisfaction. At the end of the day, a lot of products do that, but you can't go to your residents and say, great news, for $10,000 a month, you can rent this one-bedroom studio, and if you download these 42 apps, you'll never want to leave, right? So integrating all of this into one place is where the investment really makes the most sense. The cool thing about a lot of products out there today is that they require Wi-Fi, which is great in new builds. ADT is a 150-year-old company. We operated on phone lines a while back. As phone lines got phased out, we moved to cellular communicators. As 2G got phased out, we upgraded everybody to 3G. As 3G's been phased out, we've moved up to 4G. But with cellular communication, there's an always-on aspect to smart home, so it's not reliant on other technologies in the tech stack that multifamily operators go with. So the investment decision itself is one that a lot of our buyers have gone all in on. They buy one property, it works well. They add 5 more properties, that works well, and then they say, what's the holdup? We'll get into more B and C stuff, but this is not a luxury ad in a lot of cases. I don't live in a luxury home, and I have smart home in my house. So it works in B and C properties. It works in A properties. It's the same across the board.
And it wasn't all that way. Going back to when you started knocking doors, I remember when we had some door knockers who'd be like, hey, I just talked to an apartment complex owner, and they're ready to put one of these into everything. And the sales rep was really excited. From a back end, it was like, no, we can't do that. Like, one, our systems didn't work to be able to do that, nor would it deliver the right value to an apartment complex owner.
Right.
What's changed between 20 years ago and now with your solution that really does bring value both to the resident, but particularly the property owner?
Well, I can tell any of you that visit a property that an ADT rep stops by, they'll still get the same happy ears whenever you say, hey, I want all 200 units done at once. And that'd be like a small business or a residential rep at ADT. The value differentiator is the enterprise software behind it. So last year, in the middle of the year, around June, ADT acquired a company called IOTIS. IOTIS is one of the smart apartment players in the space, along with the other ones that you're all familiar with. But the enterprise software is really the kicker, where you get a bulk rate, which is heavily reduced over our retail rate. You can charge your residents less than the retail rate that they would get if they called ADT directly. A lot of you as operators probably have residents who make requests, hey, can I add smart home in here? Hey, can I add a security system in here? As long as there's must-tells approved by the property management company, our single-family sellers will still go out there and sell residents. But that demand is there, and you can capture the profit from that because of the bulk rate and then the integration on the software side, where when you move a resident in, they get access to their smart home. When you say a resident's moving out, their access to the smart home goes away. ADT has primarily been an integrator until the acquisition of IOTIS, where we now own the software that we're putting into these solutions as well. But as an integrator, we're always looking for new partnerships. We're always looking for ways to expand what you can do without having to download another 41 apps when you get into the property. So that's the big difference, is that instead of 200 single solutions with 200 logins, there's one login. You can see every smart home, every thermostat, every lock, control vacants. There's a lot that you can do with it. So
I'm going a little bit off script here, but as you are dealing with clients and they either have the opportunity, they're about to sell a property, or they're looking to buy a property, how does the existence or non-existence of a solution like yours impact the valuation? What are they telling you as to how that plays in?
that is a great Taylor Wiedeker question. So that might actually be a natural segue.
It probably is.
To talk about that.
Oh, boy.
So
All right.
I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, no, so great question. Let me think about that, because I was definitely not prepared to answer that. It was going towards Marshall, so I was like, I'm interested. Here we go. All right. Okay, so really, when an owner is considering a new technology, they need to be thinking long-term, and I think that many of the providers in the space today, they're excellent individual solutions. I think you made a great mention of that. But the problem is, of course, your residents left with 42 apps or whatever number of apps that really aligns with the number of systems you guys have decided to adopt. So it's really important to make sure that you find an integrator and a partner, like whether it be ADT, whether it be one of the other providers, whichever one you guys like the best. But make sure that those providers are looking to the future to ensure that they are future-proofing themselves, as well as you're going to want to make sure you're focusing on technologies like, for instance, our clients, whenever they're installing smart locks, we don't have them do the keyless version of the smart lock. We have them do it's the YRD 226, which is the one that has the physical key and the digital key lock in one. And the biggest reason for that is because devices like that, they're more of like middle ground for a lot of the tenants that aren't necessarily embracing new technologies. They're still, looking for that physical keyhole, and so ultimately, by deploying certain technologies, it will allow not only your tenants that are there today to remain happy with the home that they've built, but ultimately it will ensure that the next generation of renters, such as my generation and below, those are the guys that you're really trying to prepare for, and they expect technology to be included foundationally. So it definitely changes kind of, if you're a long-term holding owner-operator, you definitely want to make sure you're thinking about those things. But if you're looking to make a quick sale, then the valuation can be significant. There have been savings primarily from if, let's say, a new development is built and ADT is the solution you're going to deploy, ADT will write you a contract that will let you capitalize the full operational expenditure on the front end with that new development. So when you go to sell, of course, it's going to look pretty positive from a dollars and cents standpoint, because they're not going to see that monthly expenditure coming out. They're only going to see the revenue increase from that technology being deployed. But there are already systems like, say, monitored security that owners are charging residents. Actually, in Miami, we have a client, they installed smart home right next to a community that only was doing security only. And security only was getting $45 a month just for security. So when our client decided to deploy smart home and security, they're getting $75 per unit per month because they're still able to provide security that's expected, but now there's an additional differentiator. So when it comes to the sale, you know what I mean, and when it comes to a potential investor wanting to take on this property for the next 5-10 years, it's definitely important to make sure that if they're not with ADT or if they're with their own approach, that the hardware they deploy through a company like ADT is still applicable and future-proof and agnostic. So.
And I will go a step further with that, just because we've dealt with some customers who have acquired properties that had a competitor system in it, and we've dealt with some owners who have sold a property with ADT system in it. It's almost unanimous. Like we've got clients who we do the majority of their portfolio, they'll buy a property with a competitor, and they say it's easier to just keep this here. So the sale is not hindered at all by smart technology in there.
Right.
They're still acquiring the property, even with a preferred vendor in place, and they're saying, we're just going to keep this one as a one-off because we're already getting the revenue. The investment was already made by the previous owner. And for those owners with us that sell their properties, the handoff is almost always flawless. Like, hey, this transfers with the property. This is something that we're already charging residents for. And I don't think we've had a single instance of pushback from a buyer where ADT is active there already, or any smart home solution is active, where they say, we'd like to buy the property sans this smart home technology. It's like a swimming pool. It's like a gym. If it's a fixture in the property already, you're buying the property with that there. So
Right. I mean, from a single home residential point of view, when you're looking at homes and saying, okay, where can I flip? Here's some things I know that if this house is on the market, I know I can buy it. I can put these things in to add value and turn around and reap that harvest, or hold it and reap that harvest. I'm just kind of curious what some of the most commonly cited technology aspects exist in multifamily that are some of those most popular technology items. And maybe this is a question for our audience. And so is Katie here to make sure she's got a microphone just in case. As some of you are making decisions when it comes to looking at a property, are you looking for property that you can add technology in, or are you looking to purchase property that already has that technology because you know it's going to be able to already drive that value. Anyone have anything you want to share?
We may see a hand go up for this question or for a future one, but the penetration right now for smart home, that technology specifically, is around 5% in multifamily right now. It's still wide open for all of us.
Residential, it's between 20 and 25.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's growing quickly. We're at the beginning stages of that hockey stick where there were a bunch of early adopters and even some visionaries who said, this is going to be the future. Let's implement this into our portfolio. Some of them went all in, and those folks can't look back now. They're saying there's no way we can acquire a property without this technology in it because of either the operational, all the things that you see at NAA and NMHC, right? The operational savings, the resident retention, the resident satisfaction. It's true, it does exist whenever you implement something like this, but there's still 95% open right now for this. I would say that in the new construction space, that's probably, there's a very high uptick in new construction, but a lot of B and C properties that are looking to add value turn to something like this because it's relatively inexpensive and does drive a lot of revenue at the end of the day.
Just want to tack on to that. What we see when we've had to incorporate this flexibility into our model, we offer a CapEx option, we offer an OpEx option, because different organizations, depending on how they manage their properties, if it's a purchase and it's integrated into the building and new construction, absolutely it's a CapEx project. But when it's a retrofit, that introduces a new dynamic. Is there capital budget allocated for this? If not, okay, can we slide this into OpEx? Does it make sense financially, based on what we're using it for? So, whether it's new construction or retrofit, having that flexibility on our side to address different sides of the market has been important.
We'll talk about this more on Wednesday and go into some specifics. There was a hand up here, but technology allows you to drive value in several ways. One is obviously reducing the OpEx associated with your units, but to the customer experience, you also have that ability to drive additional revenue, to have customers, residents wanting to pick your property over others, so that allows you to raise your rents. It also reduces your turnover, your churn rate. So there's a lot of compounding factors at play.
So I assume all these are wireless applications, whether it's new construction or retrofit?
For my product, everything's wireless, yeah.
Okay. And the ADT?
There's a power wire to the hub or the brain of the system, and everything else is wireless. It's using Z-Wave technology, yep.
So that makes it easy for installation. Do you probably not as much on your side, but on your side, how do you deal with so many units so close to each other and potential kind of the crosstalk of frequencies? Been all figured out?
Well, Kristen Ellis is here with ADT as well. She was our guinea pig and sold the first smart home community, and it did crosstalk quite a bit, right? There was battery drains on locks within 24 hours. It was a great learning experience for us, and thank God we had a good customer who was understanding and said, look, we're innovators in this space. We know that there's going to be hiccups. Got that resolved, and now because there's an individual hub in each unit, every device is pre-programmed prior to install to that, the hub itself. So when we get out there, everything's labeled for unit 101, 102, 103. No crosstalk between the units. Everything communicates flawlessly on its own. Of course, there are batteries in a smart lock, for example, but they usually don't go bad until the unit is turning. I don't use my front door as often as I use my garage door, but my batteries lasted about 2.5 years in a Yale smart lock. So again, great battery life out of it, not a cause for frustration. And rather than rekeying at the end of a lease, now you're just changing out 4 AA batteries. So a little bit different situation.
And I know with my home security system that as the batteries get low, it's sending a signal back to the main hub saying the battery is low, and I imagine it in turn can then pass that on to the enterprise software to let you know, hey, when we have our service maintenance guy going through that area tomorrow, go ahead and change this, or communicate with the customer to be able to get access to the unit to change it.
100%.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks to the flexibility of my panel as I started going a little bit off script there. Keeping it real, keeping it real. So as we look at, is there any technology that you're aware of that is detracting from value that, if it exists out there, really needs to get overhauled, removed, replaced?
Absolutely. I'll jump this one off. So I actually have clients at a DFW that were looking to purchase roughly 400 units or so, and they had Bluetooth locks deployed. And so they were a shop that had actually deployed the Z-Wave technology. And so looking at the capital expenditures to change every single lock, that was not something.
So they were Bluetooth, or they were Z-Wave, or they were a combination of both?
So Bluetooth does, okay, sorry, I apologize, shouldn't have got all nerdy there. So Bluetooth does not speak with Z-Wave.
Right.
So
I want to make sure if we're going to shame a technology, we're shaming the right technology here.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily that the lock itself is the problem. The problem was that it was a type of technology that didn't play well with all the other ones. So there are technologies that detract from value, but the bottom line is it's the technologies that don't play well with other technologies that are the ones that are detracting. So I was trying to give you an example with a Bluetooth lock and a client, but I think I may have complicated that a little bit. So I think foundationally, though, it's like owners have an expectation of what they expect a community to operate as. And so, when they're met with roadblocks when it comes to, say, if they're not using package lockers. There's a couple different ways to handle packages right now. There's package lockers, and there are solutions like Fetch that do package off-site delivery, right? Well, if it's a property and a property manager, I should say, that has already decided we're not going to do on-site packages, we're going to do a solution like Fetch, they're not necessarily going to want to spend the extra $120,000, $150,000 that's baked into the cost of an asset that's paid to deploy package lockers if that's not how they're operationally handling packages as a corporate company. So that's the only situation I've ever been really where I've heard that technologies have provided a negative side of things, but it's really from if the individuals that implemented that technology had pumped the brakes a little bit, done some research and understood that these things are future-proof capable, I think that likely they would have deployed the right technology. But I think there's so many different providers, there's so many different approaches, there is not a one-size-fits-all, and so everybody is really just trying to understand, like, do we deploy a Bluetooth lock or do we deploy a Z-Wave lock? And most companies don't have somebody who can tell you the difference between those two things. So I would encourage, if you guys have questions or if you don't know the difference between a Z-Wave system versus a Wi-Fi system versus these are things that we should discuss. These are things that you guys should be aware of, the differences between a Wi-Fi and a Z-Wave system. Crosstalk, huge issue.
And going back to that original example, is it fair to say that solutions that work in a single home residential can work very well, but if that type of solution is installed into a multifamily environment and treating these as just 100 separate residential units that are really close to each other, probably isn't going to be the right solution. That there are complexities like the crosstalk, there's making sure that you're providing an interface for the resident themselves, but also an enterprise level dashboard to be able to coordinate that you might not find in a regular residential solution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to cross any lines here with Joel because he mentioned possibly working with ADT at some point in the future, but proprietary is the word that comes to mind for me. So to Taylor's point, a lot of people start a conversation with a company. They don't necessarily have a head of innovation, somebody seeking out new technologies, and it's somebody who says, I've heard the buzz, I saw the 50 different booths at Apartmentalize, we need to go with smart home technology. And I'm using smart home because that's the space that I play in. The first customer the first company that you talk to, the first supplier of that technology can wow you with how the product works, can wow you with the potential, can wow you with the revenue that you can drive from it. And you can end up down a road with a company that uses a proprietary piece of software, uses proprietary software or hardware, and really drive confusion down the road. If the service isn't up to par, if the parts break, if the company starts to falter and you wonder, how much longer is this company going to be in business? If it's a proprietary piece of equipment, or if it's a technology that doesn't play well with others, that's where you get some naysayers who start to say, hey, maybe smart home's not the right thing for multifamily. Worked well in single family, works well in builder. works really well with, the high-end solutions like Control4 and luxury, but multifamily maybe isn't a good fit for this. To Taylor's point, there are a lot of technologies out there. There's Z-Wave, which is a wireless protocol. There's Zigbee, which is a wireless protocol. There's Bluetooth. And when you look at, there's Wi-Fi, there's cellular communication. When you look at all these things, you can confuse yourself into buying a Betamax player with a VHS tape and an HDMI cord, and you're like, how come these things don't work when I plug them into my TV? But having somebody, Taylor's company, the way it works is fantastic to say, I'll just guide you through this. He's not pushing you towards one solution or the other. He's saying this is what's capable, what's possible out there when it comes to smart home, and it's up to you to make the decision based on the needs of your company. So that's the way I see all of this coming together, is more consultants in the space who are able to just break through the noise and say, here's what smart home can be, and based on what you need smart home to be, here's the direction that you should go. So
I'll just add to that. I think, as vendors in the space, we got to make sure we're not being short-sighted as far as, hey, we planted our flag in this property and now we have this walled garden. So, our solution, we're completely API-driven. Our goal is to be as easy to interoperate across different platforms, because ultimately the software layer that a lot of these things come together. You can have multi-protocol radios in buildings and stuff like that. So the hub piece of it is one aspect, but then it's that end user application, eliminating the 42 apps like you mentioned. If you try to build that walled garden, you isolate the property from the potential value of using that technology in a more broad platform. And ultimately, I think that's when it starts to detract, because it starts to plant doubt whether, strategically or directionally, this is the right thing to introduce into a portfolio. If you have that one bad experience with your pilot site, you're never going to expand it outside of that. So, as vendors, we got to make sure we're not short-sighted, and we have to be thinking big picture about how we interoperate with each other nicely.
And I'll just add one more thing real quick. APIs are not just a simple thing. For those of you who are not techie people, and I'm not a techie person, right? I'm a sales guy. An API is not just like, hey, here's a 16-digit code and just put it into your system, now everything works great. There's priorities that come to that. There's every single one of you is asking your suppliers, can you integrate this product in? And we have our own roadmaps, we have our own order that we go through, and if somebody's saying, can you integrate it in for 10,000 units, that's a higher priority for us than can you integrate it in for this pilot that I'm doing in 100 units. So it sounds really cool, and I thought, when we acquired IOTAS, that it was going to be like APIs, just put them all in there. Apparently it's not that simple. It is on the back end. There's ways that you can do it, but there's obviously a priority to things. So all gets noisy in there.
Well said.
Now, just to get a feel for our audience here, if I was to ask, how many of you feel confident that you could explain the difference between Z-Wave and Zigbee and what they do and Wi-Fi? Raise your hand. You could clearly articulate that difference. Okay. I didn't want to go into this too much detail if you all already knew, but I think one of the challenges when you're in multifamily is figuring out how do you pass information from, in a residential unit, I can have that one hub and I can make sure that it can connect to all the sensors in my house. But now we're talking about a multifamily unit where I want to gather some of that information back to the enterprise level. And the challenge is, how do I do that? So Zigbee and Z-Wave are both mesh technologies where they can pass the note to their neighbor and say, here's some information, broadcast this, and it broadcasts it to the next and next, and it can work its way all the way down until you have some type of device that's collecting all that data at the end. And so Z-Wave and Zigbee definitely came of age about 15 years ago to solve some of the problems of being able to continue to pass the message around, and as long as one can talk to the other, any that are in that mesh can communicate with each other. That works for certain deployments. You mentioned that you guys use a little bit different protocol. Yep. I would imagine the reason you have to do a different protocol is because your device is right up against something that's passing voltage, and you've got a lot of...
I'll give you a real quick synopsis. So we've looked at Z-Wave, we've looked at Zigbee, we've looked at quite a few protocols. We're using LoRaWAN right now for a couple of reasons. One, it's very good at going long distances through building materials. Yeah. So I punch my signal out of the electric panel I punch it through concrete, steel, and I go about 1,000 feet, and I go up and down, 3-4 stories.
Because you're not sitting on the counter in the kitchen.
Correct.
You're inside a closed metal
you call it a
case.
Faraday cage.
Right.
It's literally going to create interference on my device, and most protocols can't get out of that. The other piece of it is extremely low power. So that allows me to inductively charge and actually harvest enough power. I do minute-by-minute transmission starting at about 1 amp with this. So for me to be able to do that, give literally 500,000 data points annually on a panel or an individual asset within a panel. This could be monitoring elevators. It could be monitoring centralized HVAC. From a maintenance perspective, you want to be able to have as clear a profile and signature for those pieces of equipment as possible. So getting that real-time data, this was the only protocol that we were able to engineer around that not only, lets me harvest the power I need and transmit with a really low power signal, but then also punch through all the complexities of the facilities that we're in. So I'd love to have a Z-Wave one, I think maybe in a residential setting where I'm only trying to go 30 feet to a gateway. That's a little different than, a lot of the campuses that I'm operating on right now where we have one gateway, for that whole campus.
So the reason I wanted to dive into that a little bit is that one of the other solutions that's been mentioned is Wi-Fi. And although it doesn't work for every single device, it is one that is becoming increasingly more common for a lot of devices that technology is going to use. And we've talked about some that are very specific to your companies, but let's talk about what are some other solutions out there in technology that you're seeing in multifamily developments that maybe your company isn't doing, but is adding value for your clients.
I'm looking at the 3 cameras right here, and I'm thinking that's an ideal Wi-Fi application. You need high bandwidth to be able to get the video out. It's a powered device in most cases. There are some battery-powered cameras on there that have motion detectors and stuff like that. But from a safety perspective, from a just understanding the occupancy patterns of a facility, I think there's a lot of value you can get by adding cameras to a facility.
By show of hands, how many of you have cameras on your property? Yeah, I think that's a pretty ubiquitous use case.
You wouldn't use LoRaWAN for a camera.
Right. but the value that you're getting from either a security perspective, from usage perspective, is important. And then figuring out how are you getting that back to wherever you need to be able to view that video, the question comes, do you have good Wi-Fi, managed Wi-Fi across your whole properties? And I think that's something that, some units are really starting to make that transition, saying, yes, we're going to treat this as a facility that has managed Wi-Fi, complete coverage, versus, not too many years ago, and maybe with some of your properties, it's like, well, it's up to the individual resident to decide what they want to do, and we have a vendor that they can connect their internet to, but if they want to have Wi-Fi in their property, they're providing it themselves. And so I think you're going to hear this mentioned a couple times over the next 48 hours of managed Wi-Fi, where that value comes, and being able to increase value. Probably can go on to here. Any other products, and we'll skip this for a second, but any other products that we haven't talked about that are driving value from a technology perspective across your client base?
Quite a few. Most of them right now are focusing, due to the economy, on operational efficiencies. So we're seeing software-based implementations on things like deposit elimination, fraud detection, just anything that an owner can take advantage of to reduce the risk associated with running a community. Those are the communities that are those are the technologies that are super, super front of mind for most communities right now. But I do know Sandia, she had mentioned that a big driver for her was the washers and dryers with the, was it?
It wasn't coin.
It was
moving away from the coin. It was digital transactions.
That's what it was, digital transactions on the property. So even though she can't be here, I think she would have been fantastic. But she had mentioned that, and she's really utilizing technologies to take things like washers and dryers and anything else that's standard to do for a resident, and she's trying to leverage technologies to make them more accessible and easier to maintain and lower the cost.
This may be incorporated into a lot of what ADT offers, but we're seeing this across multiple verticals. Indoor air quality is a huge category. We haven't specifically mentioned that one before. From my perspective, coupling that with energy, that actually is almost the silver bullet for understanding performance in a building. You know, temperature, humidity, you know, those are conditions that'll drive to mold spores and create health issues. It'll also indicate if your equipment's functioning properly. If you're using a lot of energy and you're still having humidity issues in a building, you know, you need to have that equipment serviced. So coupling different sources of data and being able to correlate patterns, I think that's something that you see a lot of interesting software applications emerging to do.
So I pulled out my phone because we're currently at 782 parts per million of carbon dioxide here in the room. I've got a little sensor in my bag there in the back. Teaching at a university, particularly over the last 3 years during COVID, for my own peace of mind, I wanted to know what the airflow was like in the various classrooms we were teaching, and as many of you probably are well aware of now, measuring carbon dioxide is a good proxy for saying how much are we getting fresh air into here versus having to rebreathe the air of everyone else in the room, which certainly is important. And I think
So are we good?
we're good. Yes, that is in the green. Now, if you look at it when you're on the planes, it's nowhere near as you think. The planes made a big deal of how much they filter the air, but they certainly don't get a lot of fresh oxygen in there when you're going.
The only other two technologies that I'll mention that I've seen an uptick in, number one is renewable energy, so going solar with some of the energy sources, and then number two, the big thing, and some markets seem to be dictating this now, is EV charging. So EV charging, there's a ton of, I don't know anything about EV, but there's a ton of really cool looking products out there, and it seems like they're really starting to refine that technology, make installation easier, make usage easier, and then obviously a lot of the properties are starting to have requirements like you must have X% for EV charging. Scheduling that EV charging is a whole nother nightmare that
You want to know when they're using their energy.
Yeah.
That's actually a core use case for me in the market right now. Just touch on that. There's EV chargers, level 2 chargers that are $400 before install. There's ones that are $10,000 before install. What's the difference between them? In a lot of cases, just data. So, I'm doing a little bit of that work right now, trying to up the ante on the lower end of that market.
Yeah.
So.
And to Marshall's point about the EV chargers, as we've been preparing for the panel discussions over the next few days, that topic has come up amongst almost every single panelist, where 6 months ago, I don't think it was ever brought up. So it definitely is one of those that feels to be on the edge. I know we have a couple vendors here showing that are doing EV chargers, and in talks with them, the few times that EV has been mentioned previously in these panels, it's always been from the perspective of we're building a new facility and we're planning to put EV in, whereas now it's immediately flipped. They're like, hey, there are ways to be able to retrofit, to be able to provide these. So before that seemed to be fairly expensive and hard to do. I think the companies have seen that gap and have come in and found ways to be able to make it easier.
I'll add one more. I'm actually more of an indirect player in this space, but demand response program. So there's a lot of incentives in many markets to get your facilities to participate. That can be sort of a cooperative effort with the tenants in the facilities. One of my go-to-market partners focuses on the multifamily space, a company called Logical Buildings, but they use either existing thermostats that are in the building, or they help bring in new thermostats that the residents can participate. Residents get something offset on their bill by participating, and it really can drive massive value for the actual owner of the facility as well. EVs, ultimately the roadmap for that is around having grid interactivity with those chargers. So, if the utility needs to draw down a few kilowatt hours off of that during a peak demand event, they'll be able to discharge out of the vehicle back to the grid. So that grid interactivity is, really going to differentiate properties over time. Are you grid interactive or not? That'll be either big check mark for your valuation, or you're going to have a path forward for that.
All right, now coming to this slide, I know we've kind of talked about this, and this has been a theme that's been running through the design, particularly as you're looking at being able to design in a way that you're getting the enterprise data. Is there anything else any of you want to add about design and system operation and how that can add value? Or do you feel like we've covered it? It's okay if we have.
I think there's just one thing I'd throw in there, and it really bounces off your EV charging concept and the design and system operation. There are opportunities that exist for you guys to monetize well outside of your resident base. And like we have clients right now in San Antonio, actually, that are putting in EV chargers outside of the gate. Like they've rebuilt their parking lot and moved it where now they have these like, what are they, level 3 fast chargers that are public and are available in San Antonio that, you know, through whatever apps there are. I don't have an electric car, so I don't know enough about how you can find them, but I do know there are those directories that exist and that they've gotten added to that list, and so they're monetizing.
People charge and they're paying through online.
Exactly. So I think if you're designing and you're planning and you're really thinking ahead of what you want to see happen with your community, I think you guys will start to put in an emphasis on monetizing things that aren't just the square footage in the community. I think there are a lot of opportunities to monetize. You guys can get a cut of grocery deliveries, you guys can get a cut of dog walks, you guys can get a cut of electric vehicle charging. Like there's no limit to how many things you guys can really monetize. And I think in the future, in the sharing economy, there will be a push away from ownership and towards these like sharing economy models in general. And I think that there's a huge opportunity that's being missed currently by the market, not taking advantage of those monetization streams as a holistic approach. And so I'm curious to see, you know, more owners as they try to make little side projects like my client in San Antonio, you know what I mean? But they've found a lot of success with it, and it's been a very profitable business for them. So I'm just excited to see.
Just I think off that, sort of wove through before, but you know, different opportunities, some of them have nothing up front that costs, and you can start to get a return immediately. Other things, you know, there may be a capital expense that you have to plan for if you want to do that. And then there's other ones where, you know, maybe as a service type of model, so it just flows into the OpEx. So getting back to that design, you know, what business model considerations do you have? You know, for a lot of the stuff we've talked about, you know, what are the networking considerations that you need to deliver it? And then how easily does that play in the software layers that you already have? Because you don't want your tenants to end up with 42 apps. You also don't want to end up with 42 apps. You know, I think everybody talks about single pane of glass. The closer you can get to that as an operator, the better.
Makes sense. So as we got one more slide on here, and then we'll turn over to any other additional Q&A from our audience. But is there any parting advice that you would give to our audience specifically about investing decisions with respect to technology?
I'd just say the market's shifted so much in the past 5 years. You know, this didn't exist 5 years ago. Energy monitoring has been around for a long time, but you know what we did wasn't possible just even a couple of years ago. I think you look at any part of the market, you have that same sort of dynamic. So technology is continuing to evolve and advance. So, you know, if you looked at something 3 years ago, 4 years ago and said, there's no way I can make this fit into my business model, you should be reevaluating, just constantly, you know, absorbing new information because the market is moving, the technology is advancing.
And vendors
Yeah.
recognize that
Vendors,
we need to provide an option of OpEx or CapEx to help ease in,
And
whether it's new building or retrofit.
I think that interoperability piece is also becoming more prevalent. So, you know, the walled garden concept, you know, for a lot of things, it's, you know, you want to be able to plug in. It's actually a feature of your product now that you work easily with this. You know, I think even, you know, ADT, you had RealPage on there. You had, you know, a bunch of other companies on there that you integrate with Yardi, all that. So, you know, that's an attribute of a lot of these platforms, whether it's on the hardware side or on the software side, is how easily it works together with other things that you're already using.
Okay. Any other parting advice?
Yeah, I'll hit it first. One of the things to keep in mind, obviously we take a look at a lot of survey data that's out there. NMHC partners with Kingsley every 2 years, and they put a lot of good information out there. Several of the surveys take place throughout the year in the multifamily industry. And one thing that's consistent, at least the thing that I hit Control F and search for in these surveys, is the demand for smart home is going up. The expectation that residents have that smart home will be a part of their apartment living experience has gone from 30% to 50% to 60% to 80% now, where depending on which article you click on and how favorable they are to smart home technology, it's almost 4 out of 5 residents are saying, in the next apartment that I rent, I will either not rent it without smart home, or I am highly likely to rent it with smart home. So they're leaning towards the 4s and 5s on these surveys. When you implement something like this, it ends up being something that the resident uses a dozen times a day. I've gotten a doorbell notification since I've been up here. You know, I could easily see who's at my door in San Antonio from here. Residents expect the same kind of thing, whether they're at work, whether they're at vacation, whether they're at a conference like this, knowing what's going on in their home, because that is their home, right? The apartment is where they live. It's where they experience everything. If we're working with a package delivery company, if we're working with a dog walking service, any of the things that we talked about here, you can tie that into a singular experience. And no matter how muscular the resident is, they're not going to use the gym 12 times a day. They're going to use smart home 12 times a day while they're at the gym, while they're at work. If a relative comes over early and they got stuck at the office, they can open the door for them. They can drop the temperature in there. And more importantly, for you, the operators, from a vacant aspect, you can control the utilities in those units. There's a single button you can push that says lock all vacant doors at 6 p.m. All the vacant doors lock at 6 p.m. You can say turn all vacant thermostats up to 80 at 6 p.m. No matter what the painter did when he was in there or the carpet layers, they drop it down to 60 while they're working, it can automatically go back up to 80 to save money over time. You can start to see that savings real time with sub-metering. So I would say it all plays in together. The residents are asking for it. They're going to use it every single day. And then it really benefits from a vacant utility standpoint. So that's the additional considerations I'd give.
Well said. Just trying to think if there's anything I can add to it. I think there's really, I mean, you pretty much covered it all. I'd say if you guys are curious to see what those dollars and cents work out to, come have a conversation with me. I'd love to chat with you about some of the intangibles. But there's a lot to digest, so my advice always to any client on our first call is always take a step back, pump the brakes, and what you think you want, write it down, and really think about that for at least a week to 2 weeks before you move on and move forward with anything. Make sure that what you want or what you think you want is actually what you want. Because oftentimes people are learning so much in sales presentations. It's just so overwhelming that you think you want this, but then 6 sales presentations later, you're actually getting this, but you think you're buying this. So it's like you're just all over the place. And it just sets up really, I'd say, disappointment for a lot of the deployers. So I'd say if you guys just take that time, focus on what it is specifically you guys are looking for, and find a provider that's willing to ensure that that is fully feasible and not something that they've never done before. I would definitely not work with any vendor that has not at least deployed in a minimum of 5,000 to 10,000 apartments at this point. It is far been in the market long enough that there is proof of working systems. There are no more nights where I'm going to have to camp in the hallways, because in the Alliance days, I know Kristen knows exactly what I'm talking about. When we had first deployed the technology, I actually did. I stayed in the hallway with the vendor that we were working with that night, and it was rough. I mean, but we've gone through this, right? We don't have to do that anymore. So that's where, now that we are a little bit further along, finding those vendors that have that experience and are learning from that experience, I would say that is the key. That would be my advice.
So as we move to questions, I'll also put up here on the screen contact information for those individuals here. So if you want to reach out to them, or everyone get the phones and
Mine's an alternate one is Joel at Vutility. I can give you my card after as well. Actually, the S and the T are inverted. So.
Oh, did I get them wrong?
On the name, it's right. So it's J Burntsen, which is the way it's spelled for my name.
My bad.
But it's also just Joel at Vutility.
Okay, so I misspelled that.
No worries.
Because I was typing it yesterday. What questions do you have? Yes, and let's get the microphone brought up here.
I bet he's got a loud voice.
Well, we got to get it.
Within multifamily right now, we're watching insurance rates go sky high. And we're watching rents starting to come back down from its peak during the COVID times. And the two big things are being capital efficient and operational efficient, which was mentioned today. Part of that, we watched Avalon Bay do Kenzo at Twinbrook, right? No property manager on site, no assistant manager on site, no leasing agent on site. It was done through smart home technology. What technologies are you seeing right now that reduce overhead on site? I'm talking about like people count, like reducing managers, leasing agents, et cetera. We talked a lot about ancillary revenues, but anything from decreasing the staff on site.
Great question.
We'll probably get a short answer here, but then I'll also say come back on Wednesday morning for breakfast. We'll have a whole session that we'll talk about this.
I would just say, the one thing you noted there is that kind of IoT is the backbone that everything else runs off of. I think that's a very, very important distinction to make, because this will be the foundational network that you guys use no matter which direction you move in. But as far as technologies that are reducing headcount are things like self-touring that are enabled by the implementation of IoT. That's just one example, but there are many out there, and ultimately there are a share approach to maintenance. So there are maintenance teams that are no longer centered at one property. They're centered in a city, and then they will basically, because of the use of IoT, as well as work order management type systems, they're able to manage maintenance at several communities instead of just one. So it's reducing the maintenance staff as well.
There's augmented reality, I think, is a really interesting thing to be looking at as part of that enablement. So,
Absolutely.
On the edge, you have devices like ours that may be providing data that are leading indicators of maintenance needs. It could be thermostats, it could be other things, could be the battery detector on the door lock, all of those things can trigger from a maintenance perspective, but then from a skill set perspective, we've got a lot. One of the challenges with maintenance right now is you have people that are sort of stepping out of the business, they're retiring, there's not an influx of people who are trying to do trades. So that work skill shortage is actually a big consideration. Augmented reality, I think, is a big part of making those types of businesses scale in the future, because you can have someone who may want to be semi-retired, may want to work from home, may not want to be in the field, but they've got decades of experience and they're helping some of those more junior level, apprentice level people go out and at least do the front end work with support. So camera phones, smartphones, those are really drivers of a lot of the technology when you get the team out in the field.
I'm going to add one just personal ADT to that. I see the timer. Yeah. ADT rolled out virtual tech last year for our single-family customers. They saved over 1 million service calls last year by handling these things over the phone. So a lot of our older veteran technicians came in-house, and customers call them directly, and they say, push this button, reset this device. So augmented reality, not just with younger apprentices in the field, but with end users as well, saying, we can help you through this.
Teach someone to fish, and then they can fish themselves.
And having apps where they can basically be doing video conferencing with the customer. They can see what's happening and do that. Okay, we are officially at time. We've got other places to get you to. Can you please join me in a round of applause for our panels today?